Family, friends, and colleagues. This is episode 24 in our series, Enhancing Human Relationships Through the Fourth R, the relationship skills. And in this episode, we'll talk about how understanding transactional analysis can actually facilitate and enhance human communication. Now, in the previous episode, number 23, Jackie and I reviewed the 7 ego steps of transactional analysis. And now that we understand those 7 ego states, we can discuss the various complementary and non-complementary or cross transactions of TA or transactional analysis.
What is a complementary transaction in transactional analysis? According to the theory of transactional analysis, a complementary transaction is one that facilitates, promotes, and improves human communication. A non-complementary or crossed transaction is one that causes discord, conflict, or friction in a relationship. Now, Richard will explain the various types of complementary and non-complementary or cross transactions of TA.
Thank you, Jackie. So here we have an explanation of those different types of transactions. And in this diagram, we see the 7 ego states. Here's person number 1 with his 7 or her 7 ego states: critical parent, nurturing parent, adult, and the 4 child ego states: natural child, rebellious child, little professor, adaptive child. Person number 1 and person number 2. And we're going to look at all the various kinds of transactions they can have. Now, a central element of the theory of transactional analysis is an understanding of how these different, or 7 ego states, operate. Now, you all know, we hope, that from a TA perspective, each of us has 7 different ways of talking to ourselves and to others. We can share information and ask questions in the adult ego state. We can share our negative values from our critical parent over here and over here. And we can share our positive values in our nurturing parent or nurturing parent. We can share our feelings and our actions in the 4 child ego states, which are depicted here for person number 1 and person number 2. Now, transactional analysis is a dynamic, not a rigid or fixed communication construct, meaning that we are all free to respond in 7 different ways to the human interactions that we encounter. However, we respond to those conversations, or how we respond to those conversations, has positive and negative consequences. Some of our responses or transactions are complementary. They facilitate communication, whereas other responses are non-complementary or cross-transactions. Those cross-transactions create discord, conflict, and friction. So now, what is the secret about these 7 ego state transactions? Okay, so when we speak from our adult and ask questions and give information, right over here, or over here, when we speak from our adult, those transactions are always complementary. Those transactions facilitate and enhance human communication. And in this diagram, when the adult in person number 1 exchanges information with the adult in person number 2, there is clarity and understanding. However, at any time the adult in person number 1 interacts with a person from a different ego state, like the adult to the nurturing parent in number 2, or the natural child, those transactions become non-complementary and cause friction or conflict. Let's give you an example. Let's say person number 1 and person number 2 are talking about the topic of abortion and are asking each other questions or giving each other information about abortion. So they're involved in complementary transactions, person number one, number two, an adult. They might try to chat about Roe versus Wade, where the Supreme Court legalized abortion, and the recent Supreme Court decision of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health, where the Supreme Court took away the right to have an abortion. Now, all these transactions coming from the adult in one person to the adult in the other person facilitate communication because they're complementary. But once one person changes their ego utterance and no longer remains in their adult ego state, conflict can occur. Thus, if person number two, now speaking from their critical parent, not the adult, and says,
the Supreme Court was right to outlaw abortion,
the sparks can fly and the ensuing transaction becomes non-complementary. Now, if person number two, right over here, should choose to speak from their critical parent, over here, person number one, over here, now has the freedom to respond in 7 different ways. And let's look at those different responses from person number one. So,
adult.
Exactly. The adult might say, aren't there exceptions for permitting abortion, such as in the case of rape or incest?
Nurturing parent.
I believe having an abortion should be legal, as determined by Roe versus Wade. It should be a decision between the woman and her doctor.
Natural child.
The decision to have an abortion is up to me. I decide. It's a free country and I should be free to make that decision, and I will make that decision alone if this should ever happen to me.
Rebellious child.
If this situation should ever happen to me, I will do it secretively, without discussing it with anyone. I will go to an abortion clinic and have it done there or wherever they provide abortion services.
Little professor.
I'm going to the library and find books and articles about abortions. In fact, I have a friend who had an abortion, and I'm going to invite her and her parents to come here and discuss this matter with you. Now, these 5 interactions between person number 2 and person number 1 are all crossed or non-complementary transactions. They cause conflict, discord, and friction. But if person number 1 decides not to speak or cause friction with person number 2, they still have the right to become an adapted child, or they could come back and go to the critical parent.
Adapted or compliant child.
Could say, I will never have an abortion, period, because abortions are wrong. Or,
critical parent.
I agree with you that the Supreme Court was right to outlaw abortions. Please note that all the possible complementary and non-complementary interactions are depicted here, right over here. It may be a little bit hard to see, but all of these things. So it says like nurturing parent gets along with nurturing parent, critical parent gets along with critical parent. I won't go over all of these, but this describes all the possible transactions that two people can have.
Now, if you want to get a copy of this handout, take a screenshot of it by going to Richard's Facebook page. We recommend that you have a discussion with your family, friends, and colleagues on how understanding complementary and non-complementary transactions can help you communicate with all kinds of people under most circumstances.
Now, in our next episode, we will discuss the 4 life positions of transactional analysis. And if you wish to offer questions or comments on this video or the entire series, you can reach Richard at rdsolomonphd@gmail.com. or you can comment on Richard's Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube accounts. Jackie and I want to thank you for being a vital part of our video series on the fourth art of relationship skills, and we'll see you next time. Bye!